And first of all, thank you for the introduction to integrity. So who we have here? First of all, Afonso Leon Leo. Okay, great. Esports lawyer.
Exactly.
And then we have, you already met him, Stephen Hanna from the Commission, no longer Coalition. Anna Baumann from Rogue, doing splendid work with Rogue in the recent years. Go Rogue.
Right, you already remembered the hashtag. Fantastic.
Yeah, you did good branding, so perfect job. And Daniel Cossi.
Yeah.
From, where is
Wesco.
it? Wesco.
Yeah.
From Brazil, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, question, more Counter-Strike fan?
Sorry?
Counter-Strike fan?
Oh, a player addicted.
As every Brazilian
Yes.
guy. Okay, great. So we want to talk a bit about integrity in esports, but one thing I find, or I realize often, that we talk about esports, but as we saw in the discussions before, that we see esports quite differently, as it a fragmented thing. So first round of question is, what is esports for you? Just going around.
In my view, I would say be rather at the very beginning like almost like a passion, like something that you do in your leisure time. Then it turned out to be almost half of my profession, because the other one is traditional sport. So that's the way more or less I would be distributing it. And nowadays, combining both passion, leisure time, and the professional aspect of it.
Oh, okay. For me, I think that it's definitely it started in from passion perspective. I enjoy the investigative element of trying to protect an industry, and I wanted to apply it to something I was already endemically passionate about. So esports was a natural fit. So yeah, I mean that's basically where I started from there.
Yeah, so what's esports for me? Looking at esports, obviously it's video gaming, competitive video gaming, but looking at it closer, you're looking at a societal phenomenon where the digital natives, this is how digital natives compete, interact, meet in the digital space, which is incredibly exciting. And on top of it, we're talking about an entire new entertainment layer, basically, that's also distributed in different ways. So little teaser for my session later, but that is definitely something that's very relevant for us at Rogue, but also, of course, for me, my role as a lawyer.
Me, it's life. It's like bacon. Bacon's life. Esports is life. It's a way to release your bad energies and also a way to get married. Because I've met my wife playing Counter-Strike. She was complaining, who's shooting me, who's shooting me? I did it in a LAN house. And we have been married for 30 years.
Way to hit on her.
Yes. So, but esports is all about fun, first of all. But when it gets to your kids, it's not fun anymore. And then you start to take a look at it as a father and at the business side. So it is all about integrity right now. It is a way to put both of them together, speaking as a father.
That's interesting, where we see as that esports is growing, and it is not a phenomenon from the recent years. So you have
Yes.
now kids talking or thinking about how to deal with it, even though you're a gamer itself. And that's the part where I like the answers in that way, that you're saying there is some passion in it, and that is something fascinating. And the idea, it's a cultural phenomenon. But where we see as a digital phenomenon, where should it go? And that's the part where integrity comes to the core of it. And that's something where we see in different countries that means something differently. But we saw one approach from ESIC. What would be other parts in that way what are integral for esports? What are the core values you want to see to be protected? Whoever we want to protect it, that would be a later question, but what are the core values where you see, okay, in 5 years, in 10 years, that is the core of esports?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think I like bored people with how many times I said it, but youth protection is key and central. The demographic of participants is increasingly fitting in that sort of frame of mind, and these people are generally, not very well versed in commerciality or decision making from a commercial perspective, but they're very talented. They're able to actually make a ton of money, and they need to have certain protections afforded to them. So that's the first one. Second of all, is the protection of the commercial environment from outside threat. Esports has had several different runs at growth, and in each time it's ended in a large fall off. So what we want to do, I guess, and I'm sure that the other panelists can agree, is that a safe, nurturing commercial environment that has certain levels of integrity protection is going to be conducive to good sustainability and longevity of the industry's growth. The final one will probably be sporting integrity. So the actual integrity within the sport itself, the way the sport is carried out and seen as a professional activity, as opposed to a hobby or a part-time gig that you do on the side of a job that you have as well. So all of these things are central, but they all speak to the longevity and sustainability of the industry.
And of course, as you can already anticipate, I think there is an excellent summary, but a couple of integrity matters you spoke about, I was already reacting in the audience where I would disagree with this or that. Just for example, talking about a commercial environment, when Ian says, if these kids take some stuff to look buffed, I mean, for us, from a team perspective, they're role models. Our commercial interest is, of course, to keep it clean no matter what, whether it has to do with performance or just appearance. For us, it's key that it is overall clean. You also asked, on top of integrity matters, what are values we want to champion in esports? And I believe we have a fantastic opportunity to go beyond integrity. There are lots of things we can discuss, multi-team ownership, stuff like this. But what I would also like to raise in this context is in esports, we have an opportunity to champion values that are similar to sports, but make them work in a digital space, such as, for example, inclusivity. I think we have a huge opportunity at hand, and probably the time is now to champion this, because otherwise we're going to nurture structures that are pretty settled in about 5 years, and that was it.
To me, integrity, first of all, we need to emphasize what does it mean. Integrity is all about the principles and values in moral and ethics, right? So we have to pass it on, and we have to show them. And the easiest way to do that is with examples. So we have to learn and we have to understand it and apply. But apply only in commercial side? Of course not. But don't misunderstand me. I come from the private side as well. I love it. Who doesn't love money? Of course. It drives the whole world, unfortunately. But when you do that, you have to realize that you have to take the educational side, the social inclusion side, the cultural thing, and to put the esports inside this whole ecosystem, this whole environment, to talk about integrity. And that's really a tricky thing, because integrity in whose point of view? Right now we completely focus the integrity thing to the athlete, because he is the one driving the whole system. And it's all about him. And he is starting in an environment that sometimes is mercenary and mercantilist. So you have to show him, you have to add values to his perspective and to teach him that if he wants to be an athlete, he needs this kind of values inside himself and to put it in practice.
I think I fully agree with all the little elements of integrity that all of my colleagues and panelists just referred to. And because I think integrity is something that is highly transversal, that it covers like absolutely all aspects of, like from youth education, which is something that ESIC is doing, and in which Anna, myself, and even more yourself are particularly and personally involved. Then as Anna was saying, the multi-ownership of clubs, because that eventually, multi-property, because that directly affects, it's true that it does not affect maybe on the competition itself like on a very direct manner, but indirectly it definitely does. So I think these are like plenty of aspects that need to be covered all together, and in the end, why? In order to transmit values of, I would say, sportsmanship or e-sportsmanship, if I should say, and the fair competition. And the fair competition also, as long as we have fair competition in all these aspects, then it will have, economically, it will be backed up.
Yeah.
Because from the moment when the competition won't be fair anymore, investors will run away, fans will run away, absolutely everybody, all the economic stakeholders surrounding it.
Yeah, that's the interesting direction you were going, saying that the core values are important, and throughout that, having sportsmanship, having inclusivity in the digital world. These are all things where esports can add value to the discussion. And what I find striking in that way, especially as you were saying from a business perspective, somewhat excusing yourself. I mean, I'm a business researcher, so why is that you are saying in that way, and that's also to the other people, that it is a somewhat bad thing that it is commercial driven and that we cannot achieve those, as you're pointing out in that way, core values are important as well in a commercial driven way. Why would you say this discussion is so against commercial in that way as something like a bad thing?
In my view, I don't think it's a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing.
No.
It depends the perspective, the way you deal with that, and you have to do it in the right way. That's why I told you it's very a tricky thing. You have to really teach and light them and to show them the right path. Otherwise, they are going to be using.
I think it's important to look at certain areas where you might have conflicts of interest. So, for example, I think one of the prime examples is looking at leagues who basically govern their own space. I think, the LEC where we operate in is a great example where the publisher makes the rules, they apply them, they will investigate violations, and they will issue rulings. Of course, this is all based on a contractual construct, but there will be cases where you have conflicting interests from a league perspective, where you want to protect your commercial product, which might conflict with full transparency in an investigation and the way you would communicate this to the outside. And quite frankly, I think there is no perfect solution to this, because on the other hand, looking at what Riot does, I think the way they have evolved, regulatory governance in the space is remarkable, because all the lessons learned, from over 10 years have found some resonance, also with us and the teams. But of course, looking at the space, might be a preferable solution to outsource certain investigations, for example, just to ensure that you might not run into a conflict of interest.
But that's a question I'm always struggling in that idea. We are saying there are those conflicts of interest, and I understand that. But where we have to think about it, is that any different if we look at FIFA or the NFL or any other sports association on a professional level?
I think they are pretty much the same as it would happen in any sort of ecosystem as it is, and that's why the thing that was pointing out Anna makes full sense, and I think that is one of the core values why ESIC was born, right? Which is precisely providing for the industry for a third, like an independent and impartial body who's in charge of ensuring that certain regulations, first of all, are being drafted, implemented, and then through a judicial proceedings that are in charge of actually like the enforcement part out of it. And that's FIFA has its own dispute resolution bodies also. Not only from ethics or integrity perspective, but also from a contractual one. And maybe that is the one that in esports we're missing, that we do have it in integrity when it comes to ESIC, but we don't have it on a contractual related disputes. And maybe it would be good that the industry gives itself like that sort of also judicial proceedings that has a specialized knowledge on that particular aspect, which I think is another aspect from which we still can learn from traditional sports, where it has been implemented.
Of course, you might have scenarios where in leagues, depending on the commercial value, arbitration is the way to go. So I think this is one of the newer developments, that you outsource the proceedings to, a third party with expertise, which might help with this problem.
We're taking currently a very active look at how an arbitration system, much similar to like a court of arbitration for sports, would work in an esports environment. So we've engaged lawyers across the world to have a look at that as a prospect, and see from a jurisdictional perspective how we can construct something that's going to be meaningful and effective. But it is a long-term, mid to long-term project. And frankly speaking, at present, I don't think there is an appetite in the industry for something like that at all. It's just premature, premature execution could stifle something that could possibly be good as and when it becomes relevant.
Inside Wisco, we are trying to build, literally trying, because it's almost impossible to do that. But we are getting there. I think by the half of the next year, High Court of Esports, but for members, and the litigation and resolution chamber. They work like the acting in commercial conflicts, and the first one acting to solve the disciplinary things. So that's quite interesting, because we have people from the Court of Arbitration helping us and being our members and trying to found this internal body. On the other side, in the disciplinary side, and also the anti-doping side, we have people from WADA, and like Fernando Solera, the Brazilian one. He is the president of the Anti-Doping Football Confederation, and he works in WADA. You have no idea how difficult it's to put 5 people in a table and tell them, look, we need a standard and we need a model. I have this model and I have this model. So we have 5 models. How we put them all together in one model? And the guys are split. So we need 5 more new people, and so on and so forth. So it's extremely difficult to have it.
Yeah, the other consideration that I'll probably call out is that integrity. There are extremes to everything, right? So the question is, we know what the ideal standard is. What can the industry stomach at the present time? That's a very, very important question. The ideal standard is something that should always be that ideal. It should be something that we're continuously working towards in the industry, but by no means should we kind of prematurely constrict the industry, because that's ultimately going to defeat the purpose of doing anything anyway. We're not going to get the results that we want, and the reality is that the industry is not educated enough at the moment. I mean, depending on jurisdiction, depending on jurisdiction. Some industries, some jurisdictions are excellent, but depending on jurisdiction, I'm talking about from a global context, the industry is not consistent or educated enough to stomach extreme levels of sort of enforcement, regulation, or government. Yeah, so I mean, it needs to be fairly pragmatic the way that we approach it.
Yeah, but it's one thing where you're saying, okay, it's maybe not that educated, but on the other hand, it's a highly complex system. I
Absolutely.
mean, if you think about, we have here 4 different countries with all the baggage in the country and all the regulation and all the legal perspectives. And on the other hand, we have to match it with an ecosystem that is highly complex. I mean, with those many games, every game developer is dealing differently. Just look at Activision Blizzard, they don't have any idea how they want to manage a game. Overwatch is completely different to StarCraft, to Hearthstone, and whatever they are doing to World of Warcraft. And that's the part where we see this high complexity, which is also stemming dynamism. So this is a fast, volatile environment. And I understand that we need a regulatory framework in it, but how do you manage in your daily business in that way that you don't, you even said it, stifle or dampen this industry, but at the same hand give them something to work with?
Yeah, I think it's all about offering the industry buy-in opportunities. So allowing them to actually come in and say, this is of value to me because X, Y, Z, this is a problem that you're solving with this specific regulation, for example. Obviously, there is an element of guiding that you must do with stakeholders in that situation, but allowing them to have buy-in creates the confidence in what you're creating and creates the confidence in the framework. Without buy-in, we can sit here and say we're the government of the world. I mean, it would mean nothing. The reality is that effective governance from a esports industry perspective is centrally dependent on the buy-in of the stakeholders that it's seeking to govern. Without that, it's useless, just, a bunch of propaganda. So, it's my opinion.
Yeah.
And of course, you need to lead by example. So depending on where you are,
Yeah.
I mean, I fully understand. For example, looking at the grassroots level, I think it's fantastic, having educational programs out there, certifications. This is, the type of development you'll see across many countries in Europe, for example. But then on the very top layer commercially, for example, looking at what we do, I believe what we're doing internally, I mean, I'm not even, saying this usually, but we have some measures even internally as a team where, we're discussing drug testing, where we discuss how do we approach player education in certain contexts. And of course, my background as a lawyer contributes quite a bit to that because I do know how vulnerable, for example, our players are to many threats to integrity, but certainly also to just, them growing up, under our guidance. So we have an immense responsibility towards them, taking care of them.
Yep.
And that, of course, also includes having internal measures as a team.
I'll give you an example, a local example from Brazil. In the Brazilian Sports Confederation, we have a lot of educational programs. It's mandatory, since you are there for that, right? You're not promoting esports events. You're not an operator. You're just a confederation doing whatever you have to do to educate. It should be for all the confederations. One of these programs, we attend kids, and we call it in Brazil favelas. Have you ever heard about that? It's the poor, really poor part of the one city, especially in Rio, and we bring them inside the Olympic Village where we have a place, and we attend it's exactly a number, 2,185 kids per week. We give food, education, they learn mathematics, they learn English, Portuguese, of course, programming, but they are also educated using the esport as a tool to create a better citizen for us. And we are trying to teach them on a daily basis how they can use what esports is bringing to them to create values and to give them an opportunity to have a career. But on the other side, they are not just playing games. They are learning languages and math and studying and learning how to become a commentator, how to become a caster, how to become a player or a coach inside one environment. So that's the good thing. That's one kind of example we have to give them.
That's a fascinating example. Just a quick question. Who is funding it, or where do you get the...
The private and government. The government takes care of the logistic, for example, and all the rest is private. We had enough of the government giving money and supporting initiatives. It should be all private. Every single confederation should have and should look for the private investment. Otherwise, they are not going to be sustainable, and they will be just one more part of the system to put public money. And I don't agree with that, especially in Brazil.
I mean, it's also highlighting this regional or national situation in that way. Just as Nico was pinpointing a bit about Germany, which is actually quite a contrast to that, where we have the same discussion, where we are but saying this commercial aspect is a bad thing in that way, is something where we cannot create a grassroots environment because the developers and the companies are making money out of it. But looking at Rogue, is there other, or are you trying to do your corporate social responsibility?
Yeah, absolutely. So for many reasons. So it starts with having a vertical approach towards talent development, and that starts at the very grassroots. But also on top of it, unsurprisingly for us, inclusivity is extremely important. So, for example, we take part in a program that we have developed together with Riot Games and together with Women in Games in France, which is an absolutely fascinating program, and I love it, where female players in League of Legends can apply to get coaching over the course, of many weeks. And then, and we have already a case study on that. And of course, they vastly improved, and they get invited to the studio and also to the teams, where they have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and just, an inspiration where they actually play together with our professional players, just like a normal training day would look like, working with our performance coach, and then sitting on stage. And I think from a corporate view, it's extremely important for us as well to just have the door wide open to create more opportunities also for female players, because this is certainly something I would like to see within 3 to 5 years, that we just have mixed teams. So that's really a passion project of mine. And this is where we double down, but also in terms of knowledge sharing, as I said, in terms of education, we really want to spread the knowledge and look into working together with associations, but also just on a national league level, for example. Of course, it's very League of Legends specific, where we meet up with other teams and just, discuss how we can improve our ecosystem with regards to integrity matters. And to a certain point, you already see success because, for example, the national leagues you will have on the secondary commercial layer in Europe, some of them have now more regulation with regards to professionalization.
Yeah, that's the part where I find it interesting to see how the esports, mainly because of lack of government, is stepping up in their self in that idea. Having such beautiful projects like in Brazil as well, the woman aspect. I would love to see more mixed teams in that way.
Yes.
But also the idea where you are seeing more the integrity role, we are trying to solve it on our own in that way. I mean, the fascinating part about anti-doping in that way, 300 tests and no doping.
Yeah.
If you look at the media part, always thinking about this one player who said he did Adderall, and it was not proven at all. And and also the legal part where you see all the regulation where business in that way are stepping up in that perspective. But talking about this idea of integrity, I love the idea with there are core values, and there are beautiful core values, thinking about passion, doing the stuff we do, where I see still a struggle in that way, especially as I'm more HR, human resource management. Passion is beautiful, but it leads to too much work. I mean, I don't have to tell you that. You're traveling all around the world to just talk for 60 minutes. And what are your thoughts about what is the integrity of the players? How do you protect the players? Because it's the core resource in that way. And what are your thoughts where the industry should move in that way?
First, you have to teach them that they are a person. They are not something. They are someone. And they need self-respect. They need to do that. They are the first one. And after that, that's our job. At least we try to do it.
And I think with regards to players, it's very good that lately there are like new academies and teams that are investing like from the very grassroots. Because I think up until that stage, we're facing a situation in which players were jumping directly from amateurism to professionalism. And that means that they were missing some certain education and certain background, which was fundamental in order to them, like how to, for instance, in the case you were mentioning, it's also on one hand like the doping aspect, which as we have seen is entirely It's definitely not a threat for the industry, but it's very important that regulations are there, tests are being conducted. Why? Because of the deterrent effect. That is super important in this case. But what happened there? It was on the one hand the doping, but on the other hand, how do you approach the press? And that's something also that players do need to, and it's part also of the integrity of the game. Why? Because it's also the image that you transmit towards third parties. So that's also that players need to understand from the very beginning, and for that they need some education. They won't be learning that spontaneously by themselves. So altogether, I think that education that these academies and these teams investing from the very grassroots will be providing them and making them that whenever they will be jumping to being pro or even semi-pro, when they are on the verge to jump there, they already have that education.
Yeah.
Maybe some of them will make it, maybe some others won't, but definitely all of them will at the very least have that education, those very integrity-related principles.
Absolutely. From our perspective, I think we kind of take a little bit more of a practical approach by doing things like creating different schemes that help professionalize certain areas that will ultimately serve the player. Like, for example, certifying talent agents. I think that's fundamental. Having an ability to say, no, you cannot represent this person because you're just his friend. You have to have some form of legal training, like some form of
course,
the correct qualification in a jurisdiction by jurisdiction, perspective. These are fundamental building blocks for player protection. Being able to say this person is a verifiable coach because he has done this thing, or this person is a correct tournament official because they know and understand the game. They don't just understand CSGO and they're going and being a tournament official at a league game. You know what I mean? So like these sort of core competencies and core building blocks are the practical deliverables that the industry needs in order to actually afford the adequate protections to players. So there is a lot of hard work that is ahead of us still in order to do that. At the moment, there's a lot of nice concepts and ideas about how to make players, how to protect players from a conceptual perspective. But until we start to implement these core concepts in practical measures, it's talk.
I fully agree with Stephen. Sorry. But on top of it, one thing that's super important for us as a team is looking at the physical aspect and how you train players and how they learn to actually also protect their body, their mind. It's incredibly intense what they're doing. And this is also where I see, this is on? Hello? Sorry, it's not really working maybe now. Okay, so I think this is where game publishers as well as teams, but basically the entire vertical in esports should get involved and just be part of bigger research projects, honestly, because this requires deep research on how we are affected by sitting in front of a computer, health around our digital environment, and also how we can train the game. So this is a big discussion, of course, amongst pro players, where lots of them have wrist problems. And it's very different, when you look at the different games. And some reason might be, and of course there's no study yet on this, but for example, in games like Counter-Strike, you can train a certain scenario over and over and over. In League of Legends, it's so complex, it doesn't make any sense to do that. So the way our guys train is they always play a game from start to end, which might take 45 minutes. And this is an extreme stress on your body and on your mind. And of course, we are working closely with everybody involved to look into possibilities, how, one, we can make our players more resilient in an environment like this, but also how we can create a better training environment, for example, together with the publisher, to improve the environment.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that. If I could just interject on that point about research. The University of Technology Sydney is actually doing a large body of research into player behaviour, specifically for esports. So they're operating out of the Direwolves headquarters in doing that. So the university has actually built a purpose-built research centre to study esports from that perspective. So it'd be interesting to give you those results when they come in.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah.
So there is another example that I'm bringing to ESCO from Brazil, that we have a nucleus. I don't know if the English translation is correct. It is a healthy and high-performance nucleus. It's something like that. We have a lot of Einsteins working there. Actually, there are 8 from many different categories, and they work exactly like that. We bought them and a lot of gadgets and testes and brains and synapses and things like that, and they are developing a wonderful, wonderful work. So you are all invited to see online on the website. We have a lot of white papers about it.
That's always good to know because, of course, we as a team don't share the insights of our research just because we use it as competitive advantage.
Sure, sure. No, ours is all online, public.
Yeah, it's always the problem with research on professional teams, but it's not.
Bad commercial interests.
Yeah, but it's a thing you always have with other sports as well. But leading to that, as you're directing to it, having you guys here and being from a university, what are the things you would love to see from us?
From universities?
From universities, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I could speak straight to that. We're starting now to really deeply look into academically proving as a matter of fact and as a matter of objective study that we can observe certain behaviours associated with certain phenomena. Like, for example, I gave the example earlier of UTS's research. Research into play behaviour and the way that players perform under stress is incredibly vital in order to help not only the teams protect their players, but also the teams to understand the way that their players will function in a high-stress environment, which is esports, in the long term, right? So not in the immediate sense. We can understand things better, like what is the real career lifetime of an individual. When is enough for them from a health perspective? Is there any sort of mitigating factors that we can attribute that would help us extend their ability to have an esports career, for example? Are we burning these people out? Are we just using them up really quickly, faster than we could in other ways? All these things are central to player health and longevity of that player and their ability to exploit their talent for their professional gain. However, on the other side of it is understanding the industry from a risk perspective as well. So I was speaking earlier to Anna about that and discussing a few studies that we want to put together to associate, to see and associate certain elements or certain threats to the industry with tangible results so that we can actually point to something and say that is a threat because of this credible academic study. We don't want to kind of do a sort of a marketing firm approach to research, which we're seeing a lot in the business environment, where we just publish massive reports with 3,000% increase in esports and 5 billion viewers, and in reality it ends up just referring to the video game industry entirely and not esports at all. So this researched approach is definitely fundamental.
I think what would be also helpful, I fully agree with all of that, of course, risk assessment, mental, physical resilience. One thing that's always missing when we have our discussion with stakeholders outside of esports is that I would love to have studies that show the positive societal impact of gaming. Because, of course, we have educated guesses around how gaming, online gaming, impacts our communication abilities, for example, how it enables, men and women, girls and boys to, work easier as a team, for example, than, just coming up in a certain educational system, or how you train a certain resilience to stress, maybe, in a digital environment. Stuff, just matters like this, I would love to see studies on that, honestly,
really
just to be able to prove a point that we're onto something societally, culturally, and that it's not all bad.
Yeah, we are working on that. No, but that's the thing we see in research as well. There's also this legitimation problem. So I think you published some research as well, if I'm correct?
From the University of Valencia?
Yeah.
Not that I was directly involved.
Okay, but where you have to struggle as well. But I observe a change a bit into direction that we can do such research and get it published in that way. So there is a shift in that way. Maybe one question, probably in a complete different direction, but as you stated, integrity is linked with sustainability.
Yes.
And this is the part where we need to move, and we are talking mostly about the social perspective. Okay, sure, economical is also included. Something we recently discussed with some colleagues, if we talk about corporate social responsibility, you have economic, social, and ecological. So it is something we talk about esports as well. I mean, it is a technological thing, and we see those big arenas now are built. So just a personal opinion in that way from you. So what is the ecological responsibility of you as an esports stakeholder?
I think it should be the same one that will be eventually applicable to any other industry, not more, not less. Because I think in esports, like sometimes we have seen, I don't know, we had this discussion like, I don't know if you were too, but I think it was with regards to addictions and so on. And many people try to apply over esports like a standard or degree of request like higher than any other industry. Why?
Yeah.
Just because it's 24/7 on the news.
Yeah.
So we try, and as it's like sort of, we see that it's, I don't know, as if
It's disproportionate.
yeah,
Yeah,
inclined to demand particularly more from this particular industry rather than any other one. So in my view, like it should be, and as a personal opinion, as you were asking, it would be exactly the same one as for the sports industry, for whichever other entertainment industry, no more or less.
Yeah, I think I'd fairly, pretty much agree with that. I think even as in ESIC now, we're starting to look at that from a policy perspective and how we can help our different stakeholders understand where they can position themselves with relation to that issue and how they can do that effectively. But it is a learning process as well for everyone involved. So it's something that definitely needs to happen, and it's going to be a process for it to actually be implemented correctly.
I think you made a very interesting point where you said in esports you're held to a higher standard when it comes to, many areas where conflicts can arise. I don't necessarily believe this is a bad thing, because seeing the results, on the regulatory end, they're quite successful sometimes, and of course, can also stifle certain developments. But since we're at the center of attention, like, no matter what happens in esports, you will see pop up YouTube videos on any type of matter that's currently discussed in esports. So it's a very publicly discussed industry. Looking at the ecological responsibility, I can only say from our view at Rogue, we discuss this every day when it comes to sustainability, and I think this is reflected probably amongst many industries, whereas you have, your drinking bottle, for example, not to produce too much trash, where, basically we educate everyone to turn off their PCs, and, you might even go further and look at when, you're building out stadiums or your own facilities, that the ecological aspect, can lead to fantastic creative solutions, and that's definitely something that's also important to us as a team.
Yes, that's the same thing we do specifically in Brazil and also in the PAMESCO, the Pan American Confederation. We try to demand from our members this kind of view, and to pass it on, to teach them how to use it, where to use it, when, and this kind of, it's more like a subjective thing, because you're not there seeing if that guy is really doing that. But, it's the first thing is to ask and to teach and hope for the best.
Yeah, but the thing I'm struggling with in that topic, yeah, sure, you're doing all this stuff, and maybe the question more, the idea, can you really compare it with sports in that way? I mean, sure, FC Barcelona has to play against Real Madrid in Real Madrid, but if you look at now what they're doing Overwatch, London Spitfire will travel all around the world in the home games and going to London and all that. In an industry that is completely digital. So how do you, so you don't have to explain why Blizzard is doing it, but talking about ecological impact, that is quite a strong impact that may not be necessary. And where I see the thing that we are probably at a higher level or have to be on a higher level because from an ecological perspective, why should Rogue travel to, okay, now Paris or to Beijing and all that?
Well, that's a very easy answer for us, just the infrastructure on the back of what we're doing. Of course, you can't connect to a game from, Europe and Asia at the same time without facing massive latency. And on top of it, of course, when we're talking about LAN events, and this is why, from an integrity perspective, it's also so important that you have your independent system. So, for example, Riot will only operate LANs on the back of their own entire system. It's actually quite impressive when you go to an event and you see like there is this entire area that's safeguarded because, of course, it's their IP and it would be super easy to basically, get the game from there. So I think infrastructure-wise, we are facing limits. Of course, then home and away, I think commercially interesting. Well, from an ecological standpoint, I think this will be not an argument in the industry where people say we are not doing it at all. But of course, I'd love to see a discussion around how we can balance, for example, the impact we have from the huge travel we have to do basically all the time.
Okay, I think we are nearly at the end. Maybe one sentence, one thing you want to see in terms of integrity evolve in the next year or years?
I think all the initiatives that Stephen was commenting that have been or are on the verge of being adopted by ASIC with all those certifications, not only for coaches but for agents and so on, are very promising and definitely a step forward for the whole industry. And just like as a sentence, like a concluding remark, I would say like integrity is one of the few things in which I think the whole industry reaches like a very clear agreement. And I think that speaks about the maturity of the industry itself, because it's something where actually like an agreement is needed in between such wide variety of different stakeholders.
For me, I think what I'd like to see, speaking from ESIC's perspective, is I'd like to see buy-in from the industry. I'd like to see people approaching us from a stakeholder level and saying, this is an important threat that's threatening this specific outcome. How do we deal with it? And then working with these people to actually adequately address it from a framework, from a standardized perspective, that we can then push out to stakeholders that are similar to them, that are probably also facing the same threats, thereby obviously reducing that fragmentation that we have.
Yeah, reducing fragmentation is definitely something that's absolutely key to unifying esports globally. So I would like to see stakeholders across the board to take more initiative also to buy into the offerings that are out there and also take part in the discussion around it, just because it's so important that, even when it comes to matters like integrity, there are lots of service providers out there who want to sell you something that might be not the right fit for esports. So it's absolutely necessary that everybody gets involved and makes at least a base commitment to integrity.
For me, esports is a tool, like any other sports, to create a better citizen. That's it. For me, that's the view. And by saying that, we can use it to bring more sustainability and responsibility to the stakeholders and also all the players. And the players, I mean the parts and not the actual athletes, doing the esports ecosystem in a better way, in a way that you can not talk about the difference, but talk about where and which point we are the same. So we have to create awareness for that point, and that's it.
Okay, I think to just shortly summarize, looking at reducing fragmentation and looking what are our common denominator, what are our shared values. And that would be something where we should move definitely in that direction. And I think that's a good final summary from that. And therefore, thank you for being in this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.